It's time for us to get our objects moving. So we need to make some keyframes to facilitate the natural transitioning between the values that we set inside of our timeline. If you're coming from Animation 301, the idea of creating keyframes should be pretty easy for you to understand and remember. We're doing the exact same thing, but with 3D values. In previous classes, we've talked about creating keyframes of drawings, and then the computer kind of interactively and very quickly cycled and changed between the drawings. We're kind of doing the exact same thing here in the 3D animation world, but instead of swapping a drawing, we're changing the values of the center point of our objects. Let me show you what I'm talking about, and once you see it going a couple times, I think you'll start to understand how easy it is for us to work with this. I'm going to create the best animation on the face of the planet. I'm simply going to move this little coin from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen. It's pretty simple. Here's the location of my coin. Currently, these are the values that I've plugged in to all of my transform channels. And for us to create keyframes, we have to be a little bit disciplined. We have to follow a very simple sequence of steps so that we ensure that we are transitioning between these values correctly. Let me show you what that sequence of steps is. Step number 1 is to put the object where we want it to begin its animation. Where we want it to begin. Well, I want my object to begin its movement over there. Pretty straightforward. It's going to start on the left, and then it's going to move to the right along the x-axis. So that's step number 1. Step number 2 is to put our playhead when we want this animation to begin. So this is the where, and downstairs in our timeline, this is the when. So I've placed my playhead of my timeline here on frame number 1. That's when. So we do where and then when. The third step that we got to do is to physically create a keyframe itself. And there's a lot of different ways that we can create keyframes that's going to lock in the transform channels. We're going to continue to focus our energy on the transform channels themselves. See how we got these little dots next to each one of these rows? Each of these channels has a dot. Whenever you see a dot inside of a channel box in Blender, that's the system communicating to you as the user that we can animate this channel. Simply clicking on the dot is going to produce a diamond. As we see in a lot of different applications, that diamond icon is a representation of a keyframe. What we've done is we've kind of locked in this value at a very specific time. I like to think of these as kind of like little eggs. You know, on the inside of this egg, instead of we find a delicious little yolk, we're going to find some values on the inside of this egg. So we've locked in this value at this time. If we zoom back down into our timeline, you can start to see that our dope sheet has come to life a little bit. The dope sheet is going to tell us all of our keyframe information. I'm just going to move my playhead out of the way for a second. If you look at the summary of our dope sheet, you can see that we have keyframe information on the object called badge. If I twirl open the arrows and start to get a little bit more granular, now we can start to see specifically which objects and which components have been keyed. Here it is. Check it out. So this is called an action. More on this much later on the course. Every animation is stored in a small data container that are called actions. We'll talk about how we can create multiple actions much later. So inside of that data container, we've stored some transform information. Well, what type of transform information? Location X. So we're going from the most broad description of our animation up here at the badge or the object level, and we're getting very granular down here at the bottom. So location X. All right. So now we go on to step 2. Step 4 in our sequence. Remember, there are a sequence of steps. Step 1, change the object to where we want our animation to begin. Step 2 is when we want our animation to begin. Step 3, we just completed it, and that's to create a keyframe. Step 4, and this is the part that everyone generally kind of misses their first or second time, is that we got to change the location of our playhead, that little blue line inside of our dope sheet. We're going to move this forward. I'm just going to put it at frame 99. Doesn't matter which frame, we can because we can always change it after the fact. But step 4 is to move the playhead. Don't forget step 4. And then step 5 is to change the location to where we want our animation to end. As described before, I want my animation to end on the screen right part of my OpenGL viewport, way up over here. And step 6 is to go in and add a keyframe. It doesn't automatically add the keyframe. We have the ability to add to auto key. We'll talk about that later. But for today, I want us to get into the habit of clicking on that little diamond icon. Once we have that diamond icon filled in so it's nice solid white, we know with great confidence that we've added a keyframe at this frame in time, which is frame 99, in on this value. Before we play the animation, let's return to our dope sheet real fast and just kind of examine the work that we've done. Because now that we have added a second keyframe into the mix here, you can start to see quite wonderfully those keyframes show up down here in our timeline. Let's play our animation. I want to return my my VCR controls, excuse me. I'm going to hit this little button right here, which is going to put my playhead back to frame 1, and then I'm going to hit the play button to see my animation come to life. And how cool is that? It's moving from the left side to the right side. Now, I mentioned a moment ago that adding keyframes is really easy just by clicking on the dots, and we don't necessarily have to worry about the granular location, if you will, because we can always change the location of our keyframes at any single time. So if you want your animation to go faster, you're going to move the keyframes closer together. I'm going to select my keyframe downstairs, and you know that you've selected it because they've all gone gold. And here's the cool thing about working with keyframes over here in Blender, is that if we wanted to change the position of the keyframe in our timeline, just hit the G key, G as in grab. And that will allow us to interactively change the location of that keyframe anywhere we want inside the frame, inside the timeline itself. You can also just simply left click and drag on it. So 2 ways of getting to the exact same result, but we don't have to rekey it. We can just edit the location of the keyframe in our timeline. I want to move these closer together. We're not changing the value, but we're changing the time that the computer requires for us to transition between these two values. Now, as we go through, I'm clicking on the playhead here, and I'm doing what's called a scrub. I'm left clicking and dragging on that blue time indicator marker, and I can see my animation happening. What's going on here is called interpolation, and this is the foundation of computer animation. We've set a start point and a stop point, and the computer is interpolating, which is a fancy word for transitioning or changing the values to get from point A to point B automatically for us, which is really cool. We don't have to draw the in-betweens in computer animation. We draw the keyframes, and the computer draws the in-betweens for us, which is very cool. As I scrub through my timeline, I want you to watch the channel box. Let me see if I can zoom in so you guys can see what's going on. Notice that the computer is automatically changing the values for us. We're exposing the underlying thought, if you will, about computer animation. We set the values, and the computer is going to transition between those values. Computer animation is really distilled into this common idea, is that it's just numbers, and the computer's changing those numbers automatically along a very specific linear scale, or in this case, an interpolated scale based off of a curve. We'll talk about those curves much later on in the course, but it's just changing the numbers for us automatically. We set the numbers, the computer is going to cycle between those numbers for us automatically. This is called interpolation, which is the heart of computer animation. Let's add another keyframe into the mix here. We have 2. We're creating some really great keyframes, which is pretty neat. Maybe on over here, we have our coin go upwards. We'll add in another set of values to make it a little bit more complex. Now, we've animated these values going along the X, okay, left and right. But now we want to add some movement going up and down. Okay, so we're going to add a little bit more of a complex movement into the mix. This is the cool thing about 3D computer animation, is that we can animate along all 3 channels within inside of these groups, location, rotation, and scale, at any single time. At the moment, though, we've only locked in scale X. So watch what happens if I go over here and say, maybe at frame 40, I want it to be up here now. Let's lock it in. We've changed the value along location Z. So let's create a keyframe. Oh, wait, why is it up there now? Well, think about this idea of keyframes. On frame 1, we only have saved the location of the X channel. We didn't keyframe in any of the Z channel information. So let's go ahead and add that in real fast. I'm going to put this down to 0 on frame 1 for location channel Z and key it. Same thing goes, now it's going in a diagonal line, which is kind of fun. Maybe over here, we still want it to be at a location of 0 on the Z. Let's key it in. There we go. And now it'll go straight up, which is pretty neat. Let's play our animation and get going with it. One of the cool things about working with our computer animation system is that we can individually animate all these individual axes. It requires us to be a little bit more mindful of how we're keying things. So in an effort to make it easier, let me show you a simple way of getting to a little bit more of an efficient animation pipeline. I'm going to select all of my keyframes down in my dope sheet and hit the X key to delete them. Bloop, now they're gone. So in every sense, I've kind of reset my animation. I'm going to put the value of Z position back to 0, and we're going to rebuild this animation very quickly. If you remember, at the beginning of this animation, we started way out over there. We had it go to the right, and then we're going to have it go straight up. 3 different stops along the road. Instead of individually keying one of these channels, X, Y, or Z for a location, check it out. Here's kind of a cool thing. If we know what the animation is going to be, maybe we key all 3 channels at the exact same time. And this brings up a way for us to an alternate way of keying. And it involves a keyboard shortcut. It's the I key, I as in ice cream or indigo. I'm going to hit the I key. It's going to bring open this insert keyframe menu. It's pretty long, but really focused on the ones at the top. Because check it out. I want to see if I can put it over there, make it a little bit easier for you to see. There we go. So we can insert location, rotation, or scale. Location and rotation. So we have a lot of different combinations of the channels that we're going to key. If we do location, it's going to automatically key all 3 location channels at the exact same time. Check it out. Notice that in our transform channels, we have keyframes for all 3. The background color has gone to this nice yellow, which is Blender's way of saying that there's keyframe data on this transform channel at this moment in time. If we go back out and look at the details of our dope sheet, check it out. If we expand open the object transform channels, we can see we have keyframe channels, keyframe information on X, Y, and Z. So step 1, where. Step 2, when. We did that. Step 3, key. We did all those. Step 4, if you remember to our keyframing process, we're going to move our playhead. Just going to move it over to frame 30. And then we got to change the values. I'm going to move this one over here. And then we got a key. Now, in addition, we could hit the I key once again and do location. That works really, really well. I like that. That's an easy way of doing it. Let me show you a third way of keying all 3 of these channels for our third movement, which is a vertical straight up and down. I'm going to go to frame 60, and I'm going to take this feller. I'm just going to move it up. So here's the third way of keying the entire set of transform channels for location, rotation, or scale. Put your cursor, check this out. I'm going to zoom in so you guys can see. If you put your cursor in anywhere inside of these three channel boxes, just simply hit I. Boom. How cool is that? It automatically recognized that the cursor was inside the location area, and it keyed each of those channels at one time. And if you look downstairs inside of our dope sheet, you can start to see that in action as well. We have location keyframes for X, Y, and Z that was automatically, or not automatically, that was put in when we hit that I key over here in our transform box. If you look at our animation now, yeah, it goes left, it goes to the right, and then it goes vertical up in there. So that's how we create and edit keyframes inside of our animation workflow here inside of Blender. It's pretty straightforward. It centers around 2 important ideas, either hitting the diamond icon or the little dot icon on each one of these channels, which transforms that channel into a keyframe, or hitting the I key in either the OpenGL viewport, the 3D viewport, or our channel boxes over here on the right. Practice this. Get comfortable making keyframes. Move them around on your timeline. Delete them by selecting them and hitting the X key. The more that we can strengthen this muscle, the more the animation process is going to be easier.